Hello, Ben, or is it Benjamin?
You can call me Ben.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Ben. How are you this evening?
Pretty good.
Well, CK can't join us, and this will be
Okay.
episode 40 of the Ranching
Okay.
Reboot podcast. Ben
Okay.
reached out to me over email and I wanted to set up doing an episode. And, I'm going to go ahead and out myself here. I thought I had one saved. I thought I had one saved in the can that I was going to edit this evening because we're going to go away for the weekend. And that wasn't the case. So fortunately, Ben was kind enough to take time out of his busy schedule to talk with me this evening. So Ben, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So you mentioned that you were on Working Cows. That's Clay Connery's fantastic podcast. I'm pretty sure that nobody that listens to this one needs me to give a shout out to Working Cows, but there it is. What episode was that? I don't remember that one.
Oh boy, I think it was. I want to say episode 134 for some reason. I might be wrong, but that sticks out in my memory for some reason.
Yeah, it's probably close enough. I'll look that up. I'll make sure that gets in the show notes. No, because this is short notice, CK can't join us tonight. So it's just us guys.
Okay.
But in your email, you were telling me about how you're from the Nebraska sandhills. You want to start there and start talking about the sandhills?
Sure. Well, the sandhills are the largest vegetated sand dune area in the Western Hemisphere. And they're the largest area of intact prairie east of the Rockies. And so the sandhills covers about 25,000 square miles, or about a quarter of the state of Nebraska, mostly in the north central to northwestern part. And I grew up on a ranch there. I'm the fourth generation there, and my great grandfather and his brother were sharecroppers in northeast Nebraska until the mid 30s, when the drought and the Dust Bowl, all those years, and then they auctioned off their farm equipment and drove their cattle from northeast Nebraska to a ranch in the Sandhills that they basically bought on a handshake from an army buddy.
Wow.
How
far was that?
It's about 100. What they actually drove them somewhere between 100 and 125 miles. They drove them across the country through.
And that was legit cross country, right? Cattle drive.
Yeah.
Horses, wagons, the whole bit.
Yes. Yeah. And they made it to the Atkinson livestock market, stockyards there in Atkinson, where my hometown is, in November, and spent the night in the sale barn office. It was the first time they'd slept inside in several weeks. So
yeah, those guys that went on the cattle drives, they were tough men. They make us look pretty weak, needing air conditioning and heated seats and pickups.
Yeah. So it wasn't as epic as Lonesome Dove, but it was a cattle drive nonetheless. It's a good story to tell about how we got started with ranching, and then the family just raised cattle from then on. And my grandpa on my mom's side and his brothers started or operated a sale barn in Burwell, Nebraska, and then they moved to Atkinson and bought the one in Atkinson. And my dad's father, my grandpa, was the order buyer there. And my mom's mom ran the Stockman Cafe in the sale barn. So we've been pretty tied up in the beef cattle world there in that community for a while. So
very cool. Very cool. Our last guest was actually Chris Redmond from the Sandhills. I think he was up around Valentine. But he's on one of Turner's ranches up there, but he's actually funny enough as it is. I set that episode to upload, and then I had to take off to go to Executive Link, and I figured I'd see Chris there because we're in the same chapter. Well, we were. He 2 weeks ago he left Turner to take another job, and it was kind of one of those just things. And I asked Tim Goodnight, his kind of replacement, said, "Things ever go okay?" Yeah, they went fine. So that's kind of interesting history in the beef business. Did your family put in a bunkhouse there at the sale barn for anybody that might be traveling through in memory of Grandpa?
I no, they they eventually got out of that business. Although my uncle, my great uncle, was an auctioneer there for a while. My grandpa was the order buyer there, pretty much his whole life. Um, but but yeah, and we had where our ranch is located historically was the kind of the end of the road, and so they put in a big corral and a series of working pens and a scale. And so a lot of the neighbors that live further south of us would drive their cattle to our place to weigh them and load them, if they didn't just drive them to town. And so our place was kind of Grand Central Station for a while, and grew up right there with the road running right through the middle. So we had it kind of split our ranch in half.
Okay. So in the email, when we were kind of emailing back and forth over the last couple of days, you mentioned something about dairy, and you've been talking about beef, primarily beef cattle from that side of it, in a sale barn. So how did your family go from being displaced in the 30s to come into the Atchison, Nebraska area to establish in the Sandhills, buy a sale barn, and then get into the dairy business?
Well, I mean, they were old fashioned homesteader types, I guess you might say, and they always milked a cow or two to keep the family in milk. And, one of the ways they basically survived the depression was, taking cream and butter and taking it to town and selling it. And so then that it was just kind of that family milk cow scale for a while. And then in 1985, my dad decided to diversify the ranch a little bit and built a dairy parlor and started milking cows. The 80s, that was right in the middle of the 80s farm crisis. And so there's actually a lot of dairies going out of business, and he was able to put together a decent cow herd of milk cows. And everybody told him he was crazy. He why would you get into milking cows right now? But he did it, and he milked cows for 30 years there. So that was kind of when I was old enough to start helping out. There was the beef cattle side of things too, but milking cows was one of my jobs, and feeding the calves. And so my dad told me when I was 9, if you help do the chores and milk the cows for a year, I'll pay you in a calf. And so I did that for a year, and he paid me in a calf. And they said, now you got to pay me to keep her until she's milking. So you got to milk some more. So I milked for a couple more years, and then she calved, and then she was milking. They said, all right, now you got to keep track of what she's given and how much she's producing. And if she can produce more than your feed costs and all that, and your board, then you can get a paycheck from this cow. And so lo and behold, she did. So I started saving some money and started buying more. And by the time I was a senior in high school, I had a pretty decent sized herd of cows that I was milking. And then I went to college.
And then what happened?
Well, I went to college and I got a degree in English. And then shortly after that, I went and got a master's degree in poetry, and then came back to Nebraska and was a college English professor for about 3 years, teaching literature and creative writing.
What happened to your cows when you went to college?
They were still there.
Okay.
They were still there. I still kept them and would sell extra ones, and dad basically milked them, and he got all the income from that, and I managed the genetics and some of the decisions on them. But we just kind of had because he was running a working dairy, it was basically, I guess you might say, kind of an equity partner, that where I had the cows, and he and my brother, and I was back there in the summer times a lot helping.
That's
So
pretty good succession planning, actually. Pretty early buy-in at 9.
yeah, yeah, yeah. I got started early. I don't know, maybe I was the world's youngest share milker at that time. I don't know.
So if you're still making all kinds of genetics and breeding calls from college and, as you're going off in the world to teach English, um, what kind of cows are we talking about here?
Well, so when I first started, I had a goal of, basically being the top production herd in the state of Nebraska, which I actually did. I did have some very strong milking cows that were making like national Hall of Fame records, and I did have the highest production herd, but it just kind of wasn't really that profitable. I mean, there in the late 90s, the dairy industry kind of had another squeeze. There was a lot of consolidation, and that was kind of when Dairy Farmers of America, DFA, which is now the largest co-op in the country, they kind of squeezed out who we had been selling milk to. And we really were faced with that choice of get big or get out. And we just decided to, we had been hearing some things about grass-fed dairy production and some things about organic dairy production. And so my dad just decided that we were going to make that switch and start basically selling raw milk and value-added products instead of commodity milk. And so when we made that decision, the genetics followed basically out of necessity. Like we soon found that the conventional American Holstein and even some of the, even the Jerseys they just couldn't handle that type of management, with where they weren't getting grain. And so we pretty much kind of culled out anything that really wasn't making it and started using some New Zealand genetics, because the New Zealanders were milking on grass-based systems and focusing a lot on things like fertility and butterfat percent.
There's not a whole lot of grain farming going on in New Zealand, and I don't think they import anything.
Yeah, so we used some of those bulls, and then we also just started saving some of our own bulls, because with the ranch background that we had, my grandpa they'd raised registered horned Herefords for a long time, and had used some, they had some of the old Lentz Anxiety Fourth line bred lamplighter stuff. And so we just kind of we weren't afraid to use our own bulls, even though most people said, you couldn't use your own bulls because you wouldn't make enough genetic progress, or dairy bulls are crazy and they'll kill you and stuff like that. We just, we were used to having bulls around, and so we just ran them basically just like a beef herd. We had never really gone full into the conventional model of confinement dairy farming. Our cattle had always been out on pasture. We raised our heifers, we backgrounded them with the beef cattle. Basically, we just treated them like beef cattle until they came in the parlor, when we gave them a pellet ration and milked them. So making the transition from a management standpoint wasn't that tough, but when we took the grain away, that was when we really had to start focusing on genetics. And so, and it eventually evolved into using our own bulls and raising the bulls out of our best cows, and just kind of doing what we had to do to produce the kind of cow that would produce milk in our environment.
How bad did everything crash when you took away their grain? Like, did
Well,
major fertility crash, body condition crash?
Body condition went down. Fertility, they wouldn't breed back. You saw it most in the heifers. The heifers would look about the same, and then they would calve, and then they just wouldn't breed back for their second lactation. They just couldn't milk and breed back at the same time. So yeah, we had a lot of heifer attrition, high rate of heifer attrition. And so, we basically had to start from scratch pretty much with the genetics, although there was a few of the cows that did fine. And it was actually a Jersey cow of mine that kind of gave Dad the idea, because she wouldn't eat grain. She was just a weird cow, and she wouldn't come in. When she came into the barn, she wouldn't eat the grain, and she would, when we turned them out into the stanchion barn to give them their feed, in the middle of the day, we would give them a scoop of grain then, and she wouldn't come in and do that. She would just go out and graze. And she was actually, production wise and in butter fat total pounds, the highest 3-year-old producing cow in the state of Nebraska that year, the year she was a 3 or 4-year-old. And so that was what really got the wheels turning for us to say, wow, you can actually have cows that will do this. How do we get more cows like that one? And we just kind of forgot about the rest of them. And so we started trying to get genetics like that one cow that we had that could do it.
Sometimes that's all it takes, is just one really, really awesome cow, but you got to be able to find that one. And sometimes separating the wheat from the chaff, you got to make a drastic change, pulling away all the inputs out from under them, and you'll find the ones that can succeed on your program and your environment.
Absolutely.
Really, really fast.
Yeah.
So, but you're not in Nebraska anymore on the dairy, are you?
No. So I moved. I'm actually now living in Freeport, Maine, which is right on the coast of Maine, about 20 minutes north or up the coast from Portland. And I moved here a little over a year ago, November of 2020. So now I am the dairy manager at a place called Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment. And it's a nonprofit farm that is mostly a farmer training, apprentice training, and research farm that also has a few hundred coastal campsites. So there's camping, agritourism, tourism, farm visitors, and then education. They run a lot of youth and school age education programs here, where they teach little classes about growing food and dairy farming and soil carbon and things like that. So it's a really interesting place where there's a lot of things going on and a lot of really talented people doing some really interesting work.
So you're the dairy manager. Like, what? I mean, from what you were describing earlier, obviously, you're working at a small family dairy, but I'm missing something. So what exactly does a dairy manager do? Are you still doing basically what every other dairyman in the world does, or are you just overseeing the people that work in the milking barns?
Yes. So I still milk the cows, feed the cows, put up hay, do all the stuff. But I have anywhere between, I think I had as few as 2 at one time, and as many as 4 apprentices that are here through the Dairy Grazing Apprenticeship program. And you did an episode with Joe Tomandl. Yeah. So anybody that's interested in that program, I can't explain the vision of that any better than he can, but that is the program we're working with here, is the DGA. And so right now I have 3 apprentices. And so there's a pretty good amount of shared labor. I mean, it's the size of the farm. We're milking, we bounce around anywhere between 30 and 40 cows. It's a single family scale, farm that would probably be supported by, 1 or 1.5, maybe 2 labor units in the, in the quote unquote real world. But yeah, so I'm overseeing, supervising, teaching, and just basically helping young and beginning dairy grazing apprentices to complete the program and move on to whatever the next step might look for them.
And for those that are interested, that was episode 21 with Joe Tomandl about the Dairy Grazers Association. I'll make sure I get a link for that in the show notes. So you also mentioned that you're on organic dairy, correct?
Yes, this is a certified organic dairy. And in fact, Wolf's Neck is one of the oldest certified organic farms in the country. And for a long time, they were a beef ranch. And they had a private label beef brand that they distributed throughout the New England called Wolf's Neck Organic Beef. And I mean, this was back when, this is back in the 60s and 70s, before there was even a national organic program.
Right.
So it's been under organic management continuously for a very long time.
What's the forage chain like for an organic dairy up there? I mean, you're pretty far north and you're right on the coast. And from what I know of Maine, like the winters aren't really the best in the world. Lots of snow.
We don't get quite as much snow because we're on the coast. So, that we have our winters are, even if you just drive a half an hour inland, their winters are much more severe. We are literally on the coast. Like most of our pastures, you could stand at the fence line and throw a baseball into the Atlantic Ocean. It is on the coast. And
that's on the coast.
And the farm is split in half by a tidal estuary that at high tide is completely full of water and it's just about to the bridge. And, low tide, it's like mud flats across. And there's guys out there digging for clams. So, it is on the coast. So the pastures are, it's heavy marine clay and saltwater marsh and coastal wetlands with pine tree forest and oak forest and rock ledge. There's the high ground isn't really like what you would think of as high ground. It's mostly rock. They call it ledge out here. It's like rock outcropping. And so water management looks a lot different here than it did in the Nebraska sandhills, where you could pour out a gallon of water and it would be gone in 2 seconds. Here, we have to deal with very wet soil. And so the grasses, we have some of our pastures have a lot of reed canary grass, like a lot of it. We have some meadow foxtail, but some of our improved ground, we've got some orchard grass and red clover and white clover and things like that coming in. And we have done some research on some alternative forages, because like I said earlier, part of what this farm does is research. And so they're part of a program. They're one of the farm hubs for an organization called Open Team, which stands for Open Technology Ecosystem for Agriculture Management. So basically they do like soil carbon remote monitoring. They have like record keeping platforms, and this is all like open source software. And so, we've done some test plots with different forages and measured different things. And I kind of get to be a part of that on the periphery. But when it comes to managing the pasture or then I'm involved. But so a lot of the research that's done is driven by grants. And so, but there's also an open ear for like if the farmer has an idea about something to study, we kind of have an outlet there where we could probably do some interesting projects here in the future.
For sure. So what's your forage chain look like? Like, and kind of what's a day in the life of a cow at Wolf's Neck look like? Like some of the other episodes, like my friend Lloyd Borntrager, 19, he's got, his cows spend most of their day out grazing in pastures behind poly wire, and he's got to run lanes. Sean Smith, I think I can't remember. There's various schemes. So what does it look like at Wolf's Neck?
So during the growing season, we keep the cows outside. We have a road that runs through the middle of the farm. And so most of our higher quality dairy pastures are on the other side of that road from the milking facility. So every morning at 5 o'clock, we go out and gather the cows. We have a lane system. So we have those acres are divided into permanent paddocks, and then we have a lane that runs basically along the road. And then there's a crossing. We bring them across. We milk them. Right. This is a grain fed operation, which we're working. That's one of the reasons that I'm here, is to transition to at least a low grain, lower input, lower cost scenario, with a goal of going completely grass fed if possible. So we bring them in across the road. They come into the pack barn where we have a feed alley. We give them a couple scoops of grain, put them in the holding pen, milk them, let them back out, fork them up hay, give them as much hay, dry hay as they want. And then as soon as we're done cleaning up the parlor and everything, we cross them back out the road, cross the road again, and put them back out on pasture. And so we'll move them. Usually we'll move them no more than twice, sometimes only once a day, and rotate them to fresh pasture every day. And then, that in the growing season, the heifers are all on pasture. This year, we did not feed any of the heifers grain on pasture. Once they were weaned, they were on pasture. And this time of year, basically for the last 2 weeks, when it's starting to get cold and you get that cold driving rain, and it's just muddy. I mean, there's just nothing but mud out there and standing water in the paddocks. There is some standing forage out there, but we just leave it. We leave that for next spring. And so we bring the cows in and we put them on a pack. They're on a bedded pack that's bedded with wood shavings or sawdust. And so now we bring the cows up to the feed alley. We till the pack, let them in the holding pen, scrape the alleyway, milk them, let them back out. And then we unroll baleage, that's native baleage that we put up here on this farm. And with the addition of the grain ration, which we are now supplementing with beet pulp. So we basically cut our grain starch ration in half, and we're now substituting that with beet pulp.
Okay.
So we're cutting back on the pelletized feed, which is kind of in organic and then conventional probably too. It's kind of the high dollar stuff. So
Right.
we're trying to get away from that. And the beet pulp, we've been able to basically cut the grain in half and substitute that with beet pulp. And so like I said, we till that bedded pack 2 or 3 times a day. We add fresh carbon or wood to it. Usually, I mean, it can be as often as every other day, depending on the situation, but we also try to let the cows out during the daytime as much as we can. And so we will unroll bales out on a pasture. We'll pick a paddock, and we have some paddocks that are closer to the barn that are not dairy quality that we don't use for the milk cows during the growing season, but we'll stockpile a little on there. And then when the ground freezes, we'll let them out in there and feed them baleage or whatever out on the ground. And then they'll be outside, even on snow, for 2 to 4 hours a day. So that helps keep that bedded pack dry. We'll till that a couple times during those days to keep the moisture, to keep it evaporating and to keep it aerated. And so then they're on that bedded pack till we go back out to pasture late April, early May. And then we compost that pack further and spread it out usually on the hay ground, but also on some of the grazing paddocks.
I was going to ask what you did with the bedded pack and how long that lasted. You mentioned you turned it 3 times a day. How do you do that?
So we we have a C-tooth harrow on the back of a 3600 Ford tractor. And we just basically, we get to play Zen garden. We go out there and just till it in concentric circles or figure eights. The apprentices all kind of have their favorite pattern that they like to use. But I tell them, you know, we call it farm in the arena. It's kind of an old rodeo term, but we
not a wrong way to do it. Just make it look pretty.
Just drive around in circles and drive. If you miss a spot, drive over, you know, and try not to drop your cell phone in there because it'll be in there. So, but yeah, so we till it, and then we also do have a rototiller, and we'll put that, like just a regular garden rototiller that would go behind a tractor, and we'll put that on a larger tractor and really do a deep till on it, usually once a week or every couple weeks, just to really turn it and get really deep down, because that harrow gets down about 6 to 8 inches. But that rototiller will really turn the bottom stuff up, and then it really steams when it's cold out.
I imagine it gets pretty thick by the end of winter.
By the end of winter, when we were cleaning it out, you know, when we started cleaning it out in June, it was about 40 inches thick, almost 4 feet deep. And so we didn't clean it out completely at that time. Because we bring the cows in and milk them twice a day. There's some not slurry, but like manure from the feed alley and the holding pen and all that. So basically, when we would scrape that out, we would mix a couple bucket loads of that kind of composted pack bedding with that, and then compost that even more. And so we got a little extra life out of it, you know, for that reason, and then it helped us with stacking. If we needed to stage manure in areas where we wanted to spread it later, we could.
So you don't have a pit system?
No.
Okay. How does that work?
We spread manure all the time.
Okay.
And compost it so that we get more value from it.
Okay. And I think I understand some of the science of why you don't want manure in a pit with urine. Can you explain that a little bit?
Well, it's volatile. You know, liquid manure is volatile. So you got your nitrous oxide and your ammonia gases that are just gassing off in a liquid pit. And then it's also hard to manage. And I don't think this farm could have got a permit to put in a lagoon. I mean,
you're on the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah. I mean, and the soil, you know, it's the water table is really high, and above ground liquid manure storage would not have ever happened here, I don't think.
Okay. That makes sense. Isn't there some difference between anaerobic and aerobic decomposition in cattle manure? So like a cow pie in the pasture or a cow pie out in the field is going to decompose differently than that manure is decomposing in the manure pit, correct?
Yeah. I mean, that manure, it'll kind of start to heat up without adding much carbon to it. But when we're stirring up the carbon and stirring up those wood chips, and we also have, because there's a lot of forestry and timber in Maine, we have access to we can get wood ash, which kind of just looks like charcoal dust, and it has a liming effect. So basically, think of what you would do with lime where you're at. That's what we do with wood ash here. And so, you know, we've mixed a little bit of that in with our compost and with our manure, usually right before we spread it. But, you know, our goal with our manure management is to keep the cows outside on pasture as much as possible, for one, and you know, with rotations and keeping them moving across the farm. But then two, never have any liquid manure anywhere. Always be mixing that manure with some form of carbon, some, you know, whether that's just regular wood mulch or the wood chip shavings bedding that we get for the barn.
I must be doing some amazing things for some soil.
Well, we have pretty good recovery rates, the if I wanted to, I could probably run my cows on a 12 to 15 day rotation here. But our goal has been this past season. And again, I'm still new here. I mean, this was my first grazing season here this last season. So I'm learning a lot as I go. But my goal was to not do that. My goal was to kind of have it at, about 30 days. And early in the season, we were moving really quick trying to knock back that meadow foxtail because it was just exploding everywhere all at once. And so what I found here, as opposed to where I was in Nebraska, we can move them fast here. I mean, you can top it, take the top third of it off and move them. You can just about cover your whole farm if you move them quick in 2 weeks, move them, come around every 2 weeks. But we found that about 30 days, between 25 and 30 days was just right for this past season. And then we did stockpile some and rest some out further. And then we had kind of the option to graze it or hay it. Sometimes, some of those times we did hay it, some of those times we did graze it. But it was nice to have that option because in July, we didn't put up any hay. It was so wet here in July that you couldn't even get a mower out in the field. So we didn't put up any hay in July, and we grazed several of our hay fields with our young stock and our dry cows because you couldn't get out there.
Too wet to be in the pasture in July, or too wet to hay in July, that won't compute for probably 90% of the people that listen.
I've never seen such a thing in my life. I mean, we would get so our ranch in Nebraska had sub-irrigated hay meadows, and there was times in my childhood where Memorial Day weekend, we get a big storm and you could paddle a canoe across our hay meadow, but never in July, never that late in the year. And so, yeah, I was stunned. I've got a mower tractor with flotation tires on it, and I was scared to death to take that thing out there.
So what are some other weather challenges that you weren't ready for coming from the Sandhills to coastal Maine?
Well, one nice thing is it's not as windy. It's just, you get that constant wind in the Sandhills, which I don't mind that, but it's very noticeable. And, on the colder days of the winter, without that wind, you just don't get quite that same biting cold, but it's high humidity. So you have that high humidity cold where, it just gets in your bones and
it soaks all the way down to your bones and stays there all day till you get a warm.
So I would say
chilly.
I would say all season, the high humidity is tough. And we get ocean spray, we get saltwater spray, sometimes in the middle of the day, it'll just look like a rainstorm's coming in and it's just saltwater spray coming in off the ocean. So that's different, but I would say the mud, the heavy soil in the mud, and just just the difference in water infiltration, and there's good water holding. Seems like there's good water holding capacity, but not good infiltration. I don't know if that makes any sense. The soil gets saturated. It's not like it's not soaking up water, but then it's just done.
Is it more of a clay soil?
Oh yeah, it's heavy clay, heavy marine clay.
Yeah, that makes sense why it would reach saturation real fast.
Really fine, silty clay. The clay that I was used to back in southeastern Nebraska was it would fracture, so it would crack, and water would infiltrate really well. This clay is just really, really fine silt.
It's probably not very much fun when it turns to mud either.
No.
Probably no bottom, all the way down.
Yeah.
What's the summer like up there?
Very mild. They, our hottest days here were like 85 degrees. But some of those days, we had 90% humidity, but it's still, for the majority of the summertime, the days were, mid 70s, low 80s, maybe. And just really, I thought it was very pleasant. It wasn't very good hay drying weather. So we do a lot of high moisture hay, and we wrap a lot of hay. I got real familiar with what a hay tedder is. But yeah, I was not used to not being able to dry hay in 2 or 3 days, or at all. I mean, it just seemed like if you didn't get dry hay put up before the sun went down, it was going to soak up all the moisture from the air and the ground, and it was going to be, you'd have to wait another 2 days. So we just basically wrap a lot of our hay, even if it's down to like 25-30% moisture. We don't try to dry it out anymore, because you can't wait around that long.
Never really gets above 85 and it's always humid and you live on the coast. It'd probably be hard to keep anything dry.
Yeah. Yeah. Dry firewood is a hot commodity.
Well, I was sitting here thinking, and you mentioned salt spray, and that got me really thinking. I'm a big fan of Steve Campbell. And he likes to say that you should be using an ancient sequestered source of salt for your cattle. Like the two he mentions are Kansas Independent Salt from Canopolis and the C90 product, which, full disclosure, that's what I use a little bit of. And the theory behind that is it's the perfect balance of water soluble bioavailable minerals that that basically life needs. And I've heard of people taking salt water, making their own sea salt water from, either Kansas Independent or C90 or an equivalent product, making seawater and going and spraying it on pastures in order to raise the brix level of the pastures. So I'm wondering if your forage, there is great on the coast because it's getting some of that salt spray and it's a little bit higher in sugar. So I'm wondering what would happen if you took like just some of your pasture grass and took it inside without where it could still get sunshine, but it wasn't getting any of the salt spray, and see what would happen with the brix and the nutrient levels in the grass.
Yeah, it would be interesting. I mean, if this farm, when it was a beef operation, used to do a little bit of that, where they would harvest on their finishing cattle, they would harvest the grass and basically kind of dry it down somewhat in a static pile, and then feed it directly to those cattle, basically with a feed wagon. And so they did some things like that, and I need to get more familiar with the history here, because they were doing, this farm has always kind of done different things and innovative things, and I've heard some stories about their feeding. So they were basically grass finishing cattle in a feedlot situation, if that makes any sense. Like they were harvesting fresh grass and taking it to their finishing cattle.
It's a thing. It's a thing. People do it. It's a thing.
So yeah, but I don't know what would happen if you like dried it down, like did some solar drying. But it does have a very distinct smell, a different smell with the grass baleage that we make here than the baleage that I'm used to back in Nebraska. So yeah, I haven't done enough research and enough testing to know what all the differences might be. But I wouldn't doubt that the salty air and there is salt. You can taste it when when that sea spray, you get it on your face, you can lick your lips and it tastes like salt. So I wouldn't doubt that has, if there is an effect to be had from salt, I wouldn't doubt that there is one with the cattle eating that grass.
what I remember from salt spray all my days on boats, it just makes everything slippery.
Rusts out all your vehicles and equipment.
Instantly, like instantly.
Yeah.
So do you still have cows on the family dairy ranch back in Nebraska?
I actually brought my cow herd here to Maine with me.
So they're there
That
on
was,
at Wolf's Neck with you.
yes. So basically I'm running two separate herds here. So we've got the Wolf's Neck dairy herd on one side of the river, and then on the other side of the river, we've got the Holt Creek Jerseys, and they're managed completely differently. I mean, they're still 100% grass fed, still organically managed, but they're not getting any grain, and never have. And I raise my calves on cows, and wean them, at much later age. And so I'm doing a little different thing with my personal herd here. We always raise the calves. I shouldn't say always, but for the last 15 years, we've raised our calves and our dairy herd on nurse cows. And we tried the calf sharing thing, or it's also called the madre method, where you raise the calf on her dam and milk the dam. We just didn't find that we liked that management system. So what we ended up doing was we would take half of the herd, and they would be the nurse cows, and we would take the calves from the milking herd and put them on the nurse cows. So every nurse cow would raise two calves, and then we would basically just run them like a beef herd. I call them my cow calf trios.
Okay.
So I ran a cow calf herd. And they were on a separate rotation on another part of the farm. And that's basically what I decided to do here, because when I moved here last November, my wife and our daughter stayed in Nebraska for a couple months. And so rather than have her have to manage the dairy, at that time we were running kind of a raw milk micro dairy. We've milked cows at various scales throughout the years, but at that time we were running a very small micro dairy that sold mainly raw milk right off the farm. And so when those cows dried up for the winter and I was out here before, we just decided when these cows calve in the spring, we're just going to let them raise their own calf. We're not even going to try and milk them when they get out here to Maine, which was a good idea because we didn't end up being able to bring them out here till May. And so half of them had calved already. The other were springing, and we had one calf born on the semi on the way out here. So it was
that's never ideal.
Yeah, it was it was just what worked out for us. We wouldn't have chosen to do it that way, but it's just kind of how things work to halt. I mean, it's to find a trucker that was coming through Nebraska that would come to Maine. I mean, it was an 1,800-mile trip for them cows, and the guy that was born on the trailer, he's running around kicking still. He's doing great, but
it'll be delicious someday.
Yeah, we made them adapt for sure. But we just weaned the heifers that were born in the spring this week. So they're doing pretty good. We're happy with how they turned out after that move.
Okay, that's great that you got to bring your cows there. So what's the Wolf's Neck dairy herd look like?
Well, it's predominantly Holstein. What I would describe as very large Holsteins. What I would not describe as a grass type cow. And so kind of the first order of business when I arrived was to kind of create and start implementing a breeding program, where we identified the goals of what we wanted for production, what we wanted to be managing for, and then just basically setting some parameters of like what we were going to start doing. And so we've started doing more strategic matings through artificial breeding, but then also running a Jersey bull with the heifers. And
Jersey bull with the Holstein heifers?
Yes.
Oh, like every other dairy guy listening to this is probably getting ready to throw a pitchfork.
Well, they actually make some really decent cows. When we switched to grass fed and my dad had Holsteins and I had Jerseys, he could see pretty quickly that he was going to have to do something different. And so he did run he ran my Jersey bulls on his Holsteins, and those Jersey Holstein crosses are amazing cows. They give more milk than a Jersey, more butter fat than a Holstein, and they have a lot of hybrid vigor. Crossbreeding is a whole other thing that kind of a trail that you can go down and talk about the merits or the dangers of it. But basically, what the goal of that was to decrease size. Because some of these cows that we're milking now, they weigh 1,400 pounds, and they're not given that much more milk than some of the 900-pound Jerseys.
They're probably eating
twice as much feed.
Yeah,
twice as much feed and taking up twice as much space. So this pack barn, is designed to basically hold, up to, if you managed it right, 50 Jerseys. And when I showed up here in November, they had 60 of those 1,400 pound Holsteins in here. And they were having a lot of trouble with hairy heel wart, a lot of lame cows, a lot of cows with staph mastitis, a lot of cows, not very many cows breeding back. So we just first order of business to kind of clean up the herd and get rid of the stuff that was just, we couldn't bear to keep them here anymore. And then implement the breeding program, which, like I said, running the Jersey bull with the Holstein heifers. They did have some Jerseys here. They had a small handful of Jerseys. And so, we're basically putting them through the same program. We ran the bull with them for 60 days. I would run them, for less. If we were further along in the program, we'll probably like to cut that back a little to select for the ones that are going to breed back earlier and calve earlier in the cycle. But we ran him for 60 days. That worked out pretty good for us. So now we have that portion. Our replacement heifers are going to calve in the spring. So we're kind of going to more of a semi-seasonal, a dual season, you might say. So a spring calving season and a fall calving season. And I say fall calving, but it's really more like late summer, because I'm not so sure that we want to be calving here in October, just because of the mud. I think I'd rather have them calved out by Labor Day. Whereas back home, I probably wouldn't even start till Labor Day on a fall calving cycle.
I always think it makes sense to be calving on your best forage, but you see what's behind me. My cows live in the pasture.
Well, that's an interesting thing, and I've had a lot of conversations about fall calving in dairies. And so the conventional wisdom that you always heard from the New Zealanders was, you want to calve in the spring. You want them to be in peak production when you have peak grass, so that you're producing the most milk when it's the cheapest to feed them. And we played around. So because we had a raw milk business, our customers always got mad at us. We did do seasonal milking for a while, but we would, our customers wanted milk through the winter. And so instead of having them freeze it, which we tried that too, we just had a fall calving herd that we would milk through the winter. And we charged them kind of a winter milk premium. You want to have milk in the winter, you're gonna have to pay us a little more. And that was fine. That went over pretty well. But what we kind of an unintended consequence was, we found that the cows and the calves did so much better. The fall calves that were born would when you took them through the winter on mom, and then you weaned them onto green grass, and they just never looked back. And they would, by the time they were yearlings, they had caught up to the ones that were 6 months older than them, that were spring calves that were 18 months. They would catch them, and they looked better too. They were fatter. They weren't as big. They weren't quite as big, but they were fatter and they were just healthier in general. And the cows, so
not as big, but fatter is a good thing.
yeah. And so the cows, you think, okay, we want these cows to be peaking at peak grass production. But I actually kind of think of it the other way, backwards. Why not have your cows peaking in milk and producing the most milk when it costs the most to feed them? Then you get more return on that feed dollar. And then when you go into the grazing season, you see a lactation persistence. So instead of having that peak where they drop off in the dry season and then go into winter, you have a peak in the winter and then they go out on spring grass and they sustain a higher level of production through the growing season. And then they're dry in the dry part of the year. And they're, when the grass doesn't have quite as much, when it's hotter and stuff, that actually worked better for us. And if I was going to go back to a seasonal calving and a seasonal dairy, I would go fall seasonal, and I would calve from Labor Day to the 1st of November. I'd dry them up they'd be dry by the 4th of July. I'd go on vacation and then I would come back and milk, because there's worse places to be in than a dairy parlor milking cows when it's cold outside. I mean, and milk.
There's probably worse places to be than a dairy parlor when it's like 100 outside too.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I'm saying is in the fall, in the hot part of the summer, you're not milking them. You're not fighting the heat and the flies milking them at that time of year. You're just moving them on pasture.
It makes sense. I mean, it definitely makes sense the way you explained it. I mean, I'm not a dairy guy, but
if you were just looking at it from like a beef perspective of which system worked best for the calves were always better for us out of the fall cows, always, without fail. I thought that there was going to be a couple years where it would be the other way, and it just never was.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, and you can't argue with somebody's data. Oh, is there still a Gotschall Ranch dairy farm back in Nebraska? Is anybody still milking cows?
My dad's got I think 1 or 2 cows that he leaves the calves on, and he milks them for kind of just himself. But no, there's no commercial dairy there anymore.
Moving literally halfway across the country in the middle of COVID. That's kind of brave. Like closing down a business to move halfway across the country. That's what I'm curious to understand that.
Well, so I had been from 2016 to 2019, I had been running grass-fed dairy with a cheese facility and we bottled milk. We sold raw milk on the farm. We pasteurized and bottled milk, cream, and butter, and we made 7 different kinds of cheese. And we marketed it all on the farm and then also direct through a farmer-owned company that I was part owner in that had its own trucks and distribution networks in Lincoln and Omaha. And I ran that. We ran that for 3 years on mostly leased property. We didn't own the ground where the parlor and the plant was. And we kind of just got to the point where we had to make a decision. Do we want to expand and hire another person or 2 and really make this go? Or do we want to scale back? Because it was getting to be too much for me and my wife to handle. And we had a 2-year-old daughter. And we just decided, our daughter's only going to be 2, 3, and 4 years old for the next 3 years. And we don't want to be doing that right now. And because we were in a lease situation, we were able to stop. We were able to just stop the lease and walk away. We sold most of our heifers and most of our milking cows out here to New York. I had some customers out here that had been using bulls and had gotten some cattle in the past, sold them all there and kept the heifers and the dry cows and stuff. And that was when I went to work for OCM. I worked for OCM with my good buddy, Mike Calicrate. He was on the board there. And I worked for OCM for from January of 2020 until October of 2020, which was the month before I came here. But I had applied for this job here. I'd heard about this place. Basically before I got the job at OCM, I'd applied for some different jobs that I was interested in a couple different places. And this place was one of them, and they had just hired somebody. And so they said, we're not hiring now. And one day I got a call out of the blue from a Maine phone number, and I answered it. And it was my supervisor here now, Joe Grady. And he said, our manager didn't work out. Would you be interested in coming and taking a look? And so talked to my wife, and she said, yeah, let's check it out. I'm ready for an adventure. And so we just, I just really liked it here. I like the people here. I like the attitude of kind of lifelong learning and research and a focus on teaching. That's important to me with the background that I have. I love teaching. I love being in the classroom. And I love that connection and that relationship that you can build with students and see real results and real progress that you just kind of turn out into the world and see what happens. I just kind of like that kind of thing. And so, we just decided to give it a shot. And like I said, I moved out here first and she came later. But we're loving it here. It sounds totally unfeasible and unreasonable and crazy, but I don't know. It just something clicked and it seemed to fit, and we kind of like it.
I had to read your email twice to make sure it said Sandhills in Nebraska to Maine. Okay, I'm a Kansas boy. I live on the south end of the state. Okay. And for my whole life, I've heard about the sandhills in Nebraska, right? Okay, sandhills, great. Big hills full of sand. Never didn't really think much of it. And everybody loves the sandhills. Everybody loves the sandhills. Well, about a year ago, I was traveling up to Rapid City. I thought, well, if I got to go from southern Kansas to Rapid City, South Dakota, I might as well go see what the sandhills are all about. I get it. I get it. I love my red hills. The sandhills are pretty. They really are. The winters might suck though. And we've kind of talked a little bit about the weather, but what I'm interested in now, and this is kind of the thread we're on, and I want to pull it a little bit, is what are some of the differences in the culture of agriculture that you've noticed going from Nebraska to Maine? And I kind of want to preface this with it was a conversation we had, shared a meal with some friends the other day. And the question was asked, what's the difference between a farmer and a rancher? And I think that really, really depends on which side of the Mississippi you're standing on or which coast you're standing on. Because like in the East Coast, my friend Michael Kinsey down in Georgia, there's no ranches. Everything's a farm. You have a cow farm. Like, you are a farmer if you have cows. If you grow crops, you're a farmer. You go to California and everything's a ranch. Nobody's a farmer in California. Everybody's got a ranch. Like Christopher Ranch. I'm like, oh, cool. That's neat. What kind of cows do they have? Strawberries. Oh, okay. So everything's a ranch in California. Everything's a farm on the East Coast. What do you think about that?
I can see that. And yeah, you're definitely right. The nomenclature is different. I don't know if I've seen any signs along the road that say ranch. They all say farm out here. But for me, boy, I don't know how I would draw that line or delineate that. I've always considered myself to be a rancher, and honestly, and I think I told Clay this in the Working Cows. I've learned more about how to more effectively manage a grass-fed dairy from the cattle ranching side of things, and thinking about some of the profitability markers, you might call them, or the targets that you want to hit, especially when it comes to breeding and fertility and age of first calving and things like that. And especially when it comes to raising your heifers and the cost of raising heifers. I've gained more from the ranching side of things and from like reading Burke Teichert articles and stuff like that have helped me more than reading like articles in Horde's Dairyman or Progressive Dairyman. Nothing against the conventional dairy world. Those guys do what they do and they do it very efficiently. But when it comes to grass-based dairy or grass-only dairy, there's just not a lot of help there. And like just the way you think about your operation and the cows and your product and your, it's just totally different. And
does some of that come from your father when he said run your dairy like you run a ranch?
Yeah. And so like when we when we started that raw milk business, he called it Gotschall Ranch. He called it Clover Cove was the business name of that. He called it Clover Cove Ranch Dairy. And so that was a great conversation starter because people are like, well, what's a ranch dairy? And it's like, well, in simple terms, it's a dairy that's on a ranch and we manage our cattle just like beef cattle, only we milk them. And then people are like, oh, okay, well, I didn't know you could do that. And then it starts a conversation, which leads to, some differences in the actual product, which was what we were selling. We started selling food instead of a commodity. And so, one of the things that, that I tell people about, how do you run your dairy like a ranch is sell meat, sell milk, sell food for people, don't sell a commodity. And so to me, that might be maybe one of the differences. Although, there's commodity ranchers too. Beef is a commodity, cattle are a commodity somewhat. So, I don't know. To me, it's kind of more of a mindset than like something that you can like see from the road as you drive by.
Right. And that makes sense.
But the culture here, there's a lot of, because we have a lot of campers here, we have a little more influx of people from like Boston and New York. There's a lot more big city folks that are watching what we do. And there's just a lot of curiosity, a lot of questioning. There's a little bit of the kind of the pet owner mentality that just can't wrap their head around the fact that your cows sleep outside, and just can't fathom, a cow giving birth. Like that's just, but they get to see it here, so they're exposed to it. And obviously I was living in farming, ranching communities in Nebraska, but I even when I was living in like Lincoln, which isn't a huge city, but it's a city, there just wasn't that much separation. Anybody you talk to on the street probably had a cousin or an uncle or their grandpa that had a farm. And so like they appreciated farming and agriculture and ranching, but they weren't like fascinated by it.
Or really connected to it.
Right. But people here are probably less connected to agriculture other than through the food they eat, but more fascinated by it, more curious about it, and much more aware of its environmental impacts. Like, I would say that our customers out here or our visitors out here are way more savvy about like soil carbon and water quality than a lot of the people, your average folks that I would, talk to back in Nebraska. I mean, they're informed about that kind of thing, and they know that it's connected to agriculture somehow, and they just are really want to learn. I've been amazed by how naturally curious the quote unquote, the city folks are, and they just really just love to talk about it and they love to listen.
I get that. I mean, I totally get what you're saying. I'm kind of curious if there's a little bit of confirmation bias in there because of who's coming to the farm, or if that's like a general overall cultural, heightened cultural awareness of things like soil carbon and water quality. And
sure, definitely. I mean, if you're going to go camping at a place called Wolf's Neck Center for Agriculture and the Environment, you're probably going to be a certain type of person, or at least you know, you're not scared off by that phrase, you know. So
Good point.
you know, so yeah, there's definitely, you're absolutely right. You know, while we get folks from all, you know, we get all types of folks here, visitors and campers. Yes, they are the type of folks that you know, that think it's cool to camp on a farm, you know, versus, you know, in the back country somewhere 100 miles from the nearest town.
You know, I think that's one of those enterprises or concessions that almost anybody could figure out how to do. Like there's several websites. Are you listed on any?
For
like there's Harvest Host, there's Hip Camp, there's those are the
I
two
can't
off the top
remember.
of my head,
Yes, they use a software system here in the campground, and I'm not, my interface with the campground is supplying the farm cafe with meat and supplying the farm store with meat. So like they have a farm store that's kind of like a big top tent, and then a farm cafe that's like a little order window with outside seating. But like, yes, they do some of that software, but yeah, I mean,
I'll find it. I'll put it in the show notes. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's kind of blown my mind how they've turned basically marginal ground that has a nice view, but it's marginal ground on this property, on this farm, into real income and revenue generation. I mean, those campgrounds are full from Memorial Day to Labor Day, and it kind of slowly trickles out from there, but there's still people camping here now. I mean, so they bring people in and they stay, and they don't just stay for a weekend. Some of them camp here for a couple weeks.
Wow. Well, you know, I imagine if I had to live through New York or Boston and COVID, I would try to buy an RV and escape too.
Yeah, COVID was really good for the camping part of things here. People, well, everywhere, people got more interested in outdoor activities. So yeah, we've seen a huge influx of visitors. I think in 2020 they had somewhere north of 33,000 visitors in the season, and this year I think they almost doubled that.
33,000?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I say there's visitors here, I mean there's visitors here. Like there are people everywhere. It's like farming in a fishbowl.
My introvert self just noped out of that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's definitely something to get used to, but it's also kind of cool. It's also really interesting because you meet a lot of people, and it's not necessarily like my responsibility to be the agricultural ambassador or like the tour guide, but you know, you see these people, you talk to them, they ask you questions, and it's really cool. It's neat. And you know, some days you're having a bad day, you're frustrated, you're in a hurry or whatever, and you're just like, God, I hope I don't see anybody. I hope I don't have to stop and talk to anybody. But you know, most days it's kind of neat.
Right on. Right on.
But it is not like ranching in the sandhills.
Yeah,
we don't even have 33,000 people in the town, or
that's like 100 a day.
Yeah.
That's like,
well, they have
80 or 90 a day.
So it's open to the public year round, and they have several miles of hiking trails. And so a lot of people that are nearby come and hike here, and they have, because of the water, they have kayaking and canoeing, and then they have, you know, the campgrounds. I don't know exactly how many campgrounds there are, but I want to say there's close to 300.
Wow. Okay.
So when those are full, and then they're flipping every 3 days, you know, you're talking 900 visitors a week at a minimum.
Wow.
Just in camping.
Wow. Well, I mean, if you can do it and you want to do it, yeah, there's no reason to not take advantage of it, because I mean, the people are out there. They're going up and down the roads in toy haulers and RVs every day, and there's tons of them. There's way more than there were 2 years ago. I can tell, you know, even out here in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
So you mentioned earlier, okay, so now we know that we've got a river running through the place, and the Wolf's Neck's Holsteins are on one side and your Jerseys are on the other. So do you have two milking setups?
No, I left the cow. I decided to leave the calves on my cows and not milk them.
Okay.
So that was new for me, actually. I usually would have a nurse cow herd and then a milking herd and milk however many cows and run the calves and raise the calves on the nurse cows. But this year I left all the calves on their own mothers.
I imagine somebody that's smarter than me with dairy would have picked that up and not asked that dumb question. So the next dumb question I'm going to ask is, so when you like, are you going to be milking both herds at the same time, and how are you going to keep the milk separate?
The only way we would milk both herds would probably be to start some kind of micro dairy enterprise with my herd that did like super small scale micro dairy raw milk or butter or cheese or something like that.
Raw grass.
Although as I kind of build up my herd numbers and I have extra females, I will likely, probably not this coming season, but maybe next year, 2023, we'll probably start adding reproduction females to the wolf's neck herd.
Okay.
And if things go the way we hope they go, by then that milking herd will look a lot more like my milking herd did back in Nebraska, where I was running, doing 100% grass fed, not on a contract, but on a commercial level.
Because that's their goal at Wolf's Neck, right? Is they want to go from where they're at to a year-round grass dairy, right?
Well, that's appealing to them. And so right now, I mean, we produce milk under contract to Stonyfield. Our milk goes into Stonyfield yogurt. Stonyfield actually, back when it was owned by Danone, helped build this place in terms of the dairy. And basically, they're a partner in Open Team, and they're a partner at Wolf's Neck with our farmer training program. And so we produce milk under contract for Stonyfield. We are allowed by that contract to use a certain percentage of our production for outside sales, whether that's whatever we want to do with it. We can't make yogurt. There's a non-compete in there. But we can do other things with it. And so I think the goal is to explore more of that value-added stuff, especially because we have such a significant farm retail outlet here. And yeah, that's another reason why I'm here, is because of my experience with the value-added processing and making the different products like butter and cheese, and just what it takes to run a raw milk dairy that that is safe, that you feel good about putting out to the public. Not that I'm scared of raw milk, but you have to do it well. You have to, and that's a skill that I think young people and people that are coming into the dairy industry really want to know about.
It's
like
most
of the applicants that I see that are interested in coming here, and a lot of the applicants in the DGA are interested in a food producing dairy. Like they don't all see much of a future in contract milk production. They don't see themselves fitting into that. They don't see an opportunity for that. They may come out of the DGA and manage one of those places, and they may transition, there may be a transition of that. But I would say very few people under 30 are going to go buy land and build a dairy and get a contract. It's just not happening. Organic companies are cutting contracts right now. And the
that's
other
weird.
ones,
like that's almost counterintuitive, isn't it? That the organic companies are cutting the contracts. Like it up there in the Northeast, there was a big co-op that let a whole bunch of producers go, right? So where they get their product?
From out where you're at, down Texas in the Midwest. They're also opening some dairies closer to their processing plant in Buffalo. So basically they said it's too much, it costs us too much, it's too much trouble to drive around all these little 30 and 40, 50 cow dairies in New England. We'll just haul it in by the tanker load where we can buy it cheaper in the Midwest, or closer to our plant in New York where we don't have to haul it as far.
It's disappointing. I mean, I imagine
It's
for
very
the people
disappointing.
that live in Texas or, around that big mega dairy, wherever it is that they're building it, I bet they're happy to have it in town because they don't understand what it means for the people in New York and the Northeast, and that they're going to lose however many dozens of 30 and 40 head small dairies.
Well, that's just one of the problems when you get away from regional production is, you're competing. Basically, these farmers in the New England are forced to compete with farmers in the West and the Midwest. We have different considerations here, different costs of production. And, I was just at the Stonyfield producer meeting yesterday, and there was a presentation on the cost of raising dairy replacement heifers. And the information he was putting up there showed that it costs the average Vermont, New York, Pennsylvania organic dairy somewhere between $2,500 and $3,300 to raise a heifer to when she calves and produces milk for the first time. And that's
a lot more than a beef cow.
Yes. And so I see, actually, that made some bells go off in my head. And I started thinking, wow, what a great opportunity for a young person to get into this industry, who knows how to graze, who doesn't have money to buy or build a parlor, or doesn't have the money to buy or buy land, but knows how to graze, could lease some ground, establish a relationship with some of these farmers, and either do some custom heifer growing that included breeding services, or just buy people's extra heifer calves. I mean, if you can save $2,500 by selling your calves, I mean, that's the thing. Is like,
no, it's a hell of an idea. I mean, I could go buy a bunch of Jersey heifer calves, ball and Jersey heifer calves, put them on grass, feed them all the alfalfa they wanted, and they wouldn't eat me out of house and home. And yeah, that's a heck of an opportunity for a young person to take some of those heifers and develop them on grass and sell them back to dairies.
Well, and I think part of it is tied into that the supply needs to come from those dairies. Like, you get the cattle from those dairies, so that you're not bringing new cattle into that system and driving the market down. You're adding value, or you're basically kind of inserting yourself as a part of the value chain. And that's one thing that dairy, at least small scale dairy and maybe even organic dairy, doesn't do as well as the beef industry does. I mean, because in beef, you got your cow calf guys, you got your stocker growers, you got your guys that raise yearlings, you got, your finishers. You don't got, all these dairies are like kind of little micro and vertically integrated operations. Right. Why not outsource some of that stuff? Why not have maybe a few more specialists that can do these things, do them well and do them more efficiently, and then and have those guys kind of fit into the business.
It makes sense. I mean, it definitely makes sense.
And kind of related to that, I think that some of those beef guys have some things to learn from these grass-fed dairy guys. Because, I mean, if you want to learn how to finish, I mean, you want to talk about a lack of finishing skill in beef. People always say, oh, there's not enough finishers, not enough grass finishers. Well, you want to finish a beef cow on grass. Look at how these guys graze dairy cattle. Look at the forage that they're putting those cows on and how they're managing it. You can finish beef that way.
Yep.
You don't have to get them in and milk them. So I actually see, and this is a shameless plug for the DGA and for what we're doing here, I see a lot of value if there's some young beef kids on a beef ranch out in the West, in the Midwest, that are like trying to think of a way to become part of the family operation. Why not learn some things from the dairy industry? You might go back and be the guy that does the grass finishing on your family's ranch. You might be the kid that comes back and adds an enterprise like backgrounding dairy heifers to your family's ranch. why not do an apprenticeship and learn that? You know, nobody likes to milk cows, right? So,
Nobody likes to clean sour milk tanks. But no, I get it. It makes perfect sense. Because if you can keep a cow on a high enough plane of nutrition to be making, as much milk as she's going to make, and with the butterfat components and the protein components where you need it, if you know how to feed that cow that way, chances are you could probably make a steer look pretty fat on that same feed. And you're hit the nail on the head. I mean, it's a skill that not very many people have. Uh, I don't really know what I'm doing grass finishing an animal. I know when they look the best. That's about it. So,
yeah. Well, and if you're raising the calves on the cows, so let's say you've got some Jersey mama cows, and Jerseys make great mother cows. And they've got 2 calves on them, and they're weaning when I was shooting for those Jersey cows. They're weighing between 800 and 900 pounds, the cows, and they were weaning 2 450-pound calves. So some of those little Jersey cows were weaning 110% of their body weight.
Yeah,
now,
that's a good ratio.
If you can lease pasture, like maybe you can do it on a per head per day or whatever, maybe it costs you, let's say it costs you $1.50 per head per pair. I mean, and a pair is actually 3. So what's your cost to gain? What's your value of gain on those calves? I mean, that is some efficiency right there, where you've got this little cow that's basically a butterfat factory, and she is putting pounds on calves, and she's not taking up a lot of space and not eating a lot.
Can we talk about butterfat a little bit?
Sure.
Okay, so I might not be understanding the full context with which you use that word butterfat. So in my mind, what I hear when I hear somebody say butterfat, I'm thinking of a grass carcass, a grass-based finished carcass, and the butterfat is going to be the yellower stuff. And
okay,
through reading Johann Zietzman and Steve Campbell, there's some visual indicators that you can see on an animal that will tell you if she's likely to be able to produce more butterfat or lay down thicker butterfat deposits.
Yeah.
Did any of what I said true, or is it all bullcrap?
It's actually very true, especially in regards to the jerseys. So in dairy, butterfat is basically just the fat content in the milk. They call it butterfat because it's just what they've always called it, because butter was the product, so you want to have butterfat. And actually, on the Jersey Islands, that's how they
right?
Yeah, that's how they developed the breed. That's how they developed the breed. They actually they didn't measure how many pounds of milk they gave. They actually measured how many pounds of butter the cows produced. And so the higher percent, obviously you want a high butterfat percent, coupled with, you kind of have that balancing act between volume and percent to produce total pounds. But basically, a Jersey cow can produce between, your more commercial conventional ones are 4%. But I mean, I've had cows that were upwards of 7%, and even a couple that were up in the 8% butterfat. So twice as much butterfat in terms of percent, maybe not in terms of volume as your regular milk cow. But butterfat is directly correlated to certain meat qualities. And they've done this research. The Meat Animal Research Center in Clay Center, Nebraska, back in 1976, did a research study, and they used jerseys in it. And they found that the jerseys had the best, significantly higher ribeye fat percentage and the best tenderness by far, all breeds. And that was up against Angus, Hereford, Charolais, Limousine, Simmental, everything. And the problem with the jerseys in that study, and why they're not commercially viable for beef production, is they had the lightest, or they had the lowest average daily gain, and they had the lowest weaning weights, and all this stuff. But they also had the shortest gestation length, the lightest birth weight, fewer deaths, the lightest weaning, or the highest relative growth rate. So daily
they were
gain
better in every way that makes the cattleman money, and worse in every way that makes the packer money.
Basically, yes, exactly. Okay. And that was from random selection of commercial jersey breeds from commercial jerseys from the dominant AI studs at the time. Imagine, just think about that, and imagine if you were using jerseys that were selectively bred for the butterfat traits and the fleshing ability and the ability to put down fat and those things that it just makes you wonder, because about all I eat is Jersey beef, and until I find something better, I'm not going to switch. And that's what brought customers back to us time and time again. And that Jersey beef is delicious, and it's about the best cross that we found was a low line red Angus crossed on a Jersey. I mean, you could finish those on grass in 18 to 20 months, and the meat quality was superior. They weren't big. You were never going to have one that weighed 1,200 pounds even, but man, they were good.
But before we get away from this butterfat thread, what are some visual indicators when somebody's looking at a cow? What are some visual indicators that indicate she's laying down more butterfat and going to have richer milk?
Well, there's kind of the old peasant wisdom of, Gerald Fry was always promoting this too, going around. But if you look in their ears, they'll have yellow, almost dark orange, yellow, flaky skin inside their ears. That's one of them. And just happy, dairy cows have happy lines too. Like you look at those, you look at the
like in the face, right? In between the eyes.
Well, you look at a picture of a bull or a cow from the side, and you see those horizontal lateral lines across the rib cage,
right?
That are basically just that's an indicator. And
vertical folds in the neck.
Yes. Yeah.
Pleat in the brisket.
I don't know if you see. I haven't paid much attention to that with
that's a different fertility thing. I'm getting my Zeetzman stuff messed up. Hair on the udder. That's another one, isn't it? Like lack of hair on the udder.
Yeah, smooth, pink, hairless udder, or the hair is fine, very fine. Not that coarse, long hair, but like if the hair is really fine and short, or sometimes in the summertime, even they'll be almost completely hairless.
Anything else come to mind on that, or did I screw you up too bad and get them all?
Not really, but one of the wonderful things about modern technology is they've got this thing called a scale. And when, dairy farmers, we measure our output, and we know which cows are giving the most butter fat, and we can select for that among our herd. And, we can, we don't have to solely rely on visual indicators, we can actually drill down and pinpoint a lot of milk quality traits, either by genetically testing them with hair, blood, or skin, or by testing the milk itself. So that's one of the neat things about dairy is that element of it. There's a significant amount of testing that can be done to determine some of those things.
Well, that's a good segue into talking about lactose.
Okay.
So, controversial opinion that I have is like there's always a certain percentage of people that are lactose intolerant. Okay. I get that. Seems to be on the rise lately, way above like the historical baseline. So is it psychosomatic? Is it some other factor, or did we screw up the lactose in milk? I mean, I understand there's different kinds of lactose. There's A1 and A2 lactose, but have we all?
No, actually,
no.
A2 is A1 and A2 are proteins.
Okay.
They're casein proteins. They're a specific protein called beta casein.
I'm obviously wrong, so please educate me.
So, well, so okay, so there's several different proteins in milk, and they're different caseins. So the beta casein, what you're talking about is A1, A2, that's beta casein. And I want to say I'm somewhere on there's a histamine producing proline that's on the 67th something or other in the gene that produces the different type. So you can have different variants that are controlled by the genetics of the cow.
Okay.
But in simple terms, the A2 variant is the oldest, and the A1 variant is the newest in terms of like all of history.
Okay.
The A1 variant is the one.
So the A2 is what is the protein that would have been in the milk 1,000 years ago, and the A1 is a relatively kind of new thing. Okay, I get it.
Incidentally, the A1 protein is correlated. It's not causation, but it's correlated with higher milk volume. So think about that in terms of what we've selected dairy cattle for in the last 60 years.
Yeah.
But going back to the protein, so there's been research done that purports to indicate that the A2 protein is more digestible, has less of a diabetic type effect. You know, they've done this research in mostly New Zealand and Australia. Basically, if people have a protein allergy to milk, it's likely they have a protein allergy to the A1 variant of the beta casein protein, if that makes any sense.
And that's what people are calling lactose intolerance.
So there is, and all I have is anecdotal evidence from 12 years of selling raw milk direct to customers.
Right.
But there were definitely people who could drink our milk that was A2 and raw that could not drink pasteurized milk or even pasteurized A2 milk. And they were always told that they were lactose intolerant and that to avoid milk in all milk. But, raw milk has lactase in it. That's what that's what you don't have that helps you digest lactose.
Right.
You don't have the lactase enzyme that digests it. But raw milk has lactase in it because it hasn't been killed through pasteurization. So, I'm not gonna say that raw A2 milk is like this wonderful superfood that can cure everything, but some people who can't drink other kinds of milk can drink it and not have the problems that they have when they drink other types of milk.
My anecdotal evidence would tend to agree with yours, sir.
And there's a huge demand for A2 milk. And the people that I hear from that are wanting A2 cows, because you can test your cattle genetically and find out if they are homozygous for the A2 variant of the beta casein protein. And you can selectively breed your cattle to all produce that particular protein. So that's one of the things that I do.
It sounds like I kind of did have most of it correct. I just had some of the terminology wrong. We did screw it up. We did screw it up.
Lactose is a sugar. So it needs that lactase to help your body digest it. But the A2, so yeah, a lot of people confuse, oh, well, this is A2 milk. I won't be intolerant to it. I'm lactose intolerant. No, if it's raw, maybe, but like pasteurized A2 milk would still have the same effect on a lactose intolerant person.
What about raw A1 milk?
I have no idea. It probably would be fine for someone that was lactose intolerant, but not someone that was allergic to the A1 protein.
I wonder if there's anybody that's, that's doing a raw dairy with those big, massive, bony Holstein cows. Huh. Well, if there is somebody out there listening, give me a call. Maybe we'll do an episode. Oh, well, we kind of need to. We've been going for almost an hour and 45. Kind of need to start wrapping this up. Have we left anything on the table?
I don't know. I mean, I like to talk about all kinds of stuff. So, I'm always willing to jump in and discuss things. But no, I think it's been an interesting year for everyone, everywhere, this 2020 and 2021 to see what kind of things have happened. And I'm just happy to be still involved in agriculture, still involved in the dairy industry. And, your podcast and other podcasts have helped me stay connected, at a time when, there weren't conferences, there weren't meetings, there weren't things that you could do and see people. And so I'm grateful for those types of outlets and educational opportunities to hear from people that you'd love to be sitting across the table from, but you just couldn't be. And so I'm looking forward to more of that. And like I said earlier, if there's any folks out there that are interested in grazing dairy, that's one of the things that I'm trying to do here is figure out what kind of person we need to produce and how we need to train people to be the people that will carry this industry into the future. Because, a lot of people will say, well, there's no future in dairy. There's no hope. You got to milk 1,000 cows or you just might as well stop, not even try. And I just don't think that's true. I think there will always be a place for a well-managed, well-conceived of dairy business. It doesn't have to be at a large scale. I think it's all about the people who are doing it and their attitude and their ability to figure out what they can do using their skills and knowledge in a place where they can put those things to use. And that's what we're trying to do here is identify those people, bring them here, get them the training and the experience that they need and the opportunity to learn and the opportunity to fail and the opportunity to, decide what they don't want to do just as much as decide what they do want to do. So we accept apprentices applications on a rolling basis. So we might be full now, but we're not going to be full forever.
Yep. And I'll make sure that I have a link to the Dairy Grazers Apprenticeship Program website. I almost said Dairy Grazers Association. I'll make sure I have that link in the show notes. And if anybody listening to this didn't catch it on the first go round, we did a full episode with Joe Tomandl on the Dairy Grazer Apprenticeship Program. That was number 21. Check your favorite podcast player or app or provider for that. Oh,
yep, that was a good one.
So Ben, I appreciate you joining me on short notice. Like I said at the beginning, and it's been an awful lot of fun. Where can we find you on social media? How can folks get a hold of you? Anything you want to plug? Floor is yours. You can even ask me a bunch of questions. We don't have to quit now. We can go for a little bit.
Well, my website is holtcreekjerseys.com. And then the website for the farm here is wolfsneck.org, wolf with an E. So WOLFESNECK.org. And then I'm on Facebook and Instagram with Holt Creek Jerseys. So if you want to see pictures of cows and stuff and all all that's on there.
I always want to see
but
pictures of cows.
but I have a question for you, Brian. One of your episodes, you said something about Corrientes. I mean, I know you do the Corrientes deal there. You said something. I don't know if it was you or one of your guests, or maybe it was even on a different podcast. Somebody said Corrientes are the Mexican Jersey. What was meant by that? Was that you?
No, I didn't say that, but it sounds exactly like something I might say.
Maybe it was a guest on your podcast.
Well,
it was somebody that was buying Corrientes cattle, and I thought that was maybe you, because I know you were doing that, weren't you? Or maybe you still do.
Oh, I haven't bought any in a while, but I mean, so for those that are catching the audio version, we don't have video version yet, but you see that all the cows behind me are, they're Corrientes. Some are full blood, some are longhorns. Like this one, where was I? I was in the right place already. This one right over here, that's a longhorn. I've got 2 of those, but probably about I've got about 15 that are half bloods, that are half Faro Cattle Company composite bull and half Corriente. I like them because they have something that no other breed has. Okay, the original Creole cattle were brought over in the early 1500s, turned loose in Mexico. I mean, very similar to the Piney Woods cattle and the Cracker cattle down in Florida. But these cattle basically ran wild in Mexico, northern Mexico, and in the desert Southwest for 400 years. They have 400 years of natural selection in an arid environment on hard grasses. Like, okay, so I understand that. And then, I've been through ranching for profit. Got to cha-ching myself on that one. And on the last day of ranching for profit, they do a really powerful exercise. They say, okay, what's your neighbor's ranch look like today? And then you go through, you put numbers up there. And then they say, okay, what would happen if you took all the fences out and you came back in 50 years? What would it look like? And you run through that exercise. Like the cow size come down, fertility rate drops, the population distributes more back to 50-50. And then they say, okay, make one change to your neighbor's cow herd that's been run wild for 50 years to make it profitable. And the only change you really need to make is you need to do a little bit better breeding, and that's it. Like you just need to change the bull ratio, and then the economic situation magically improves. So I looked at that and go, oh, an 800-pound cow, 80% fertility on native range. That's what I need to be looking for. That's where I think I found it. And it's going to take me some time. It's going to take a few generations to get the ones that I want, just like it took you a while to get the jerseys you wanted, or the cows you wanted when you pulled all the inputs out from under them. I didn't start with anything good. I had to start with crap I bought from Sale Barn and some really good ones I bought from a buddy. But it's been rough. I mean, I don't want to share numbers, but it hasn't been as good as I expected, but I've got some really nice looking heifers on the ground. I got some really good looking coming twos that we're going to breed next year. And there's some good looking cows out there. I mean, there's some good looking cows that basically eat sticks, rocks, and dirt and drink air and weigh 900 pounds and, wean a 350, 400-pound calf. It's not a lot to complain about. So I'll get there. But the natural selection, the small frame size, the forage efficiency, that's what really appeals to me about the Corrientes.
Yeah, I think that, the smaller cows seem to me to just do so much better. And that has come from, I've seen that come out not from selecting for size, like selecting for several other things, and kind of having some parameters that have really nothing to do with the appearance of the cow at all, or the physical characteristics of the cow. And then all of a sudden you just start to see this phenotype start to emerge several generations into it. And you're like, I wouldn't have thought that was what was going to happen here. But, you know, when you have those basically economically driven selection factors, you know, what's gonna allow me to keep these cows for a few more years? What's gonna enable me to pay my bills and make a living and continue to do this? And then what comes out of that on the cow end of it, it's like you couldn't have decided what that was when you started.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting.
You know, Macaulay Kincaid said it best. He says, you can't control what you sell for. You can only control how much money you spend. You can't control how much money you make. You only control how much money you spend in this business. And I get that. I totally get that. You know, I'm all about the low input stuff. Well, Ben, it's been a fantastic evening. I need to get out of here though.
All right, sounds good. Thanks for the opportunity, and it was a good talk.
Well, thanks for joining me, and y'all have a good week.
All right, you too.